So, what is a product and what is a service? What are goods, products and services? We all know what goods, products and services are, but have you ever stepped back and considered, well, what exactly are they? Companies are increasingly offering product-service combinations, but do they know what they're selling? It is important to define things for communication, marketing and maybe even for taxation. But what about setting company strategy? Do you offer product or service or both? And what exactly do you mean? And what do those terms mean to you? If you think of some examples of a product and a service, what defines them? What makes them the same and what makes them different? So what are goods and products? These are terms that I use interchangeably, and I'll treat them as the same thing. There is an argument, a discussion in the academic literature to separate them, but it's not one I've engaged with. So, do you happen to know who this is? Good looking fellow, big nose like me. It's out of fashion now, I appreciate. He wrote a book, The Wealth of the Nations, which really began to characterise goods. His name is Adam Smith. And he said a nation's wealth is created through surplus production of goods that are exported. Ownership's right can be established and exchanged. Goods embody specialised knowledge. You export goods overseas and that generates wealth. And when you make goods through what we would understand now as mass production, separating the process, he said one pin maker can make 20 pins a day, but 10 pin makers can make 48,000 through a mass production process. Now, we often see four main features used to characterise what a service is. Intangible, it only exists in connection with other things. They're not physical objects like brands or goodwill. Heterogeneous, it may be varied according to the nature and the requirement of the customer. Each time you experience a service, it's different. It's inseparable. Services are inextricably linked with the customer in terms of the production and consumption. You cannot produce a service separately until both the customer and what they know is wanted. Perishable, this idea that services perish in the very instant of their performance. For instance, if you're an airline operator and you're flying on a Monday, you can't sell that seat on a Tuesday because it's gone. However, academics, we like to challenge each characteristic. Let's consider intangible, and this is a question I've been considering. What is a book or recorded music? Is it a product or a service? Well, the book or CD is tangible, but the story or music is intangible. Maybe there's something about intangible products there. But what about if you stream it? When it's online, there's no tangible element. So how do we consider that? Heterogeneous, it may be varied. Well, McDonald's produces identical burgers globally. They're always the same whichever country you're in, whereas Mercedes offer the E-Class car in 10 to the 24 different options, yet McDonald's would be seen as a service and the E-Class Mercedes very much a product. Are they really heterogeneous? Is that really a good term to use? Inseparability is more tricky, the separation of production and consumption. Well, theoretically at least you can separate it. You must be able to provide automated services, but they do stand ready to provide service. Perishable, the idea that services perish in the instant. Well, cleaning staff, their service is evident after they're finished, so does their service really perish? IHIP is often cited, but we can find or think up exceptions. So this is the work of Lynn Shostack, who presented the idea of services on a spectrum with intangibility and type dominance as units of analysis. So if we start on this left-hand side here, we see very product dominant entities. Salt, it's very tangible. It's also always pretty much the same. It's sodium chloride. As we move towards the middle, well, we can see the car, the automobile. Yes, there's very much a product there, but cars are different. There's a lot of individuality tied up, a lot of emotion tied up in cars. Fast food, right in the middle, that's a balanced entity between, well, you've got the product, which is the burger or chicken or whatever, and the service that comes with it. And then right at this far end, very service dominant entity, teaching, that's very much always different. It's a unique experience for everybody involved in a classroom. So differentiating goods and services, we can think about tangibility, can you touch it? Storability, goods can usually be stored, services cannot. Transportability, goods can normally be transported, services very difficult to transport as such, though you might be able to export them using telephone exchanges and exporting that sort of call center. Simultaneity, goods are usually produced prior to the customer receiving them. Customer contact, whereas customers usually have low contact with organisations producing goods, they have high contact with organisations producing services. And the way you judge the quality. Customers judge the quality of an operation producing goods by the goods itself, they will judge the quality of the services by looking at the service and the way it was delivered, the process. So here's a timeline. If we start on the left, we can see Adam Smith characterising the physical assets and some of the characteristics of perishability, tradability, referring to goods, and services are non-tradable in many respects at that time, non-physical assets. Moving forward, we see the work of Say, who introduced the concept of materiability, tangible and intangible. Senior, looking at goods as objects and services as performances. Hicks, identifying that the production and some consumption of goods are separate and hence can be conducted in different locations, whereas services are instantaneous, so often require human resources and skills at a higher level than goods. Lynn Shostack, who talked about the intangibility, the brand image, and argued that intangibility can no longer be the distinction to separate services from goods. Delaney and Godfrey, Arajo and Spring, looking at the producer interaction, which distinguishes between goods and services. So goods can be sold to the consumer without knowing the producer, whereas services always involve some triangular relationship between producer-user interaction. Hill in 1999 recognised the ambiguity of separating goods and services based on their perishability. Axel Winstrom, rather than distinguishing services and goods explicitly, it's more helpful to organise and manage firms with complex product service offerings, and Arajo and Spring recognising the future trend integrating manufacturing into service to provide solutions through life cycle of the product. We could then maybe extend into the work of Andy Neely, looking at the service paradox when you move from product to service, how you might not make as much money as you thought you would. Tim Baines, Howard Lightfoot's work looking at servitization of complex manufacturing, where you're adding services to gain value, additional revenue from mixing products and services to create an offer. Many people know that products and services are different, not how or why they need to maybe take a different management approach. Product dominant entities exhibit core features that we've largely understood and accepted. Defining service has been more difficult. At the moment it tends to be defined as what product is not. Many different perspectives have been presented of what makes a service. I think my favourite was Harker, who said a service is something you can't drop on your foot. But I don't think anyone's likely to arrive at a definitive and accepted distinction between goods and services. People have been trying for 230 years and will doubtless continue to do so.